Hi mates! Sir Clive Sinclair went down in history as the man who made the computer revolution, who gave us the ZX Spectrum. He is just a legend, and today we've got a great opportunity to talk with his son Crispin. So, Crispin Sinclair on Sinclair channel. Enjoy the interview. Hi Crispin.
Hi, Emily. Hi, good to see you.
How are you? Are you ready?
Yes, yeah, perfect. I thought it was easier to do it sort of kind of face to face, as it were, rather than sort of record something. I thought it was a bit more, easier and maybe a bit more natural.
So, let's get it started and tell us what Sir Clive was in his private life. Was he a good father? Did he give you enough time and attention? Or did he devote all his time to his work? And in general, what was it like to grow up in the family of a person like Sir Clive Sinclair?
It's a good question. I think, overall he was not too bad as a father. I think he probably did give most of his time to the business, and maybe the family took a little bit of a back seat. I guess he was a very busy guy, so maybe a bit less time than maybe other fathers would give their kids, or in some cases. But yeah, sort of not too bad, and life at home was was fine, same as ever, really. So all good.
In the Microman movie, have you watched the Microman, by the way?
I have, yes.
And what do you think about it?
I thought it was very good. I think I remember you're saying. I think your question before said sort of, was he quite an aggressive character? Yeah. And I think I would say that's fair to say yes to that. I mean, I think the Micromen portrayed that pretty accurately. I think it was, I guess in that sort of business, you've got to be, a strong character to be at the top of it. I guess, like most industries. So I thought the Microman was pretty accurate, actually.
Did he watch Microman, Sir Clive?
No, I don't think he did. When it first came out, I sort of phoned him up and said, this is going to be on TV, shall I come round? Maybe we could watch it together, father and son, for a bit of fun. And he was like, no, I don't want to see it. So I don't think he ever saw it. I think he was, didn't want to watch it. But I think it was accurate. I think it was pretty accurate, the film.
He was a strong person at work and at home too, but maybe at home he was a warm and soft person.
Well, he was quite a strong character at home as well.
Yeah,
he was pretty. I think that was in his personality.
Thank you. Did Sir Clive work at home, and did you pay attention to what he was doing? Was he involved in development or some kind of technical work, or was it always just the paperwork of a businessman?
He did work at home, but it was always really just with paper and pen. So he would sketch out his ideas at home, but there was no sort of room with computers in it, or a soldering irons or electronics. He knew his electronics very well. I mean, that was his subject. But he did do a lot of work at home, but always just with a paper and pen. And I guess he then, once he's got his ideas together, I guess he took them into the office on a Monday and got the engineers to do some actual work on it. But yeah, he worked at home quite a lot. He was always thinking about the sort of business and what the next product would be and how to make it and stuff.
But he did think about ideas, technical things, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. He'd always be sort of sitting there, maybe listening to classical music he used to like, and always sort of thinking, okay, what's going to be the next product, how to do it, how to make it better. Always thinking of the sort of creative next step.
I didn't know that he liked classical music. What exactly did he like? Do you know?
I don't know entirely, because I'm not a great classical music fan, so I can't sort of rattle off. But yeah, pretty much he used to listen to a lot of classical music, and that's the only type of music he listened to, always classical. But and I know there was some Beethoven used to blast out quite a bit, and probably some Mozart. Other than that, I'm not sure. So, but you could always the house was always full of his classical music.
That's a bit of surprise for me. I didn't know that.
No, I didn't think of that. Yeah.
You were 16 when the incredibly successful Spectrum appeared. Did Sir Clive talk about it at home, for example, at breakfast or dinner? And if so, what did he tell? Was the Spectrum's success significant and important for him?
I think, yes, it was. I mean, that was, it had success before, like with the going back to the 1970s, with the digital watch and the pocket calculators, and the ZX80 had been very successful, and the ZX81, but the ZX Spectrum was really the one that absolutely exploded. And that was, you go into the shops and all of a sudden there was nothing but Sinclair games in the shops. It's quite odd to see when you think, oh, that's my family, and you're walking into the shop and there's Sinclair in everywhere. So I had slightly strange times. But no, he was very happy with it, and happy days.
Do you know that there were millions unofficial Spectrum clones made all around the world, especially in Russia and other former Soviet countries? What do you think and feel about it?
Yeah, I think I don't know how much he knew about it at the time, because obviously this was still, the Iron Curtain was still up at the time. There were a few copies made, people trying to copy it in the West, and he was very quick to try and close them down, and did close them down to stop the copies. But I think sort of behind the Iron Curtain, there's nothing you could do from the West, so I think that's sort of just something you didn't really mind. If you can't do anything, no need to get worried about it. So, and it's a nice thing, it's a good thing to. It was a huge thing in the West, but I've sort of finding out it's maybe even bigger behind the Iron Curtain in a way,
Yeah, there are lots, millions of people who love Spectrums and who had Spectrum back in the days, not in 80s but in 90s.
Okay, yeah, probably a little bit later than in the UK.
After official life of the Spectrum in the UK.
Okay, yes, it's fantastic, lovely stuff.
You designed a bike called the Babel bike, if I read it correctly. Tell us about it, and why do you consider it to be the safest bicycle in the world?
Well, it's sort of, the design has evolved, actually. So the website, I've got to update the website. So the new design, I'm still working on the bicycle, but the new design is that it keeps a child safe on a bicycle. And in fact, I take my daughter, who's 3, she goes, I bicycle her to nursery on the prototype one, and it's got a roll bar for the child, a seat belt, a proper safety seat, and that's, as far as I know, that's the safest bike in the world for taking a child on.
For sure.
And hopefully, the prototype is working well. I've had the testing done at Cranfield, which is a sort of international testing in place, hopefully going into production in the near future. And I would like to go on to design a sort of safer bicycle per se, but that's making it safer for the child is a sort of an easier product. So starting with that one and then moving on to the safety bike.
How did it happen that you, just like your father, develop unusual vehicles?
Yeah, I suppose some of it sort of rubs off a little bit. I guess growing up with someone who sort of designs things from scratch, you sort of, you can't help but sort of think about such things. And I love cycling. That's my main sort of passion, as it were. And always wanted to design a sort of a new type of bike would be the ultimate goal. So just love designing stuff, and think that's I think it's an important area where bicycles need to improve, is the safety side.
So are you an engineer?
Not by I don't have any qualifications in engineering, but I've read a lot of books about bicycles. I can, strip a bicycle to the ball bearings. I can take car engines apart. I do a bit of welding. I've got quite a good workshop. So not qualified as an engineer, but sort of good thing with things mechanical.
Yeah. I got it. As far as we know, Sir Clive didn't like computer games, but did you play games in youth, and did not Sir Clive forbid you to do it? And if you did play, what computers or game consoles did you have in your childhood, and which one was your favorite?
Well, my childhood, I was born in 1966, so my early days with computers, I had a Binatone. I saved up my pocket money for a Binatone black and white games console. The old ping tennis game. Yeah. So that was me saving my pocket money. I had a Tandy TRS-80 level 1, which my father bought for me. I think it would have been in probably 1976 or 1977, I think. And I used to program that. So I taught myself to program in BASIC on the Tandy. And what I heard years later was because in those days children normally didn't have their own computer, so it was quite, I was the only one at school I know that had a computer. And I heard later that it was sort of the fact that I was so keen on it and so loved it that sort of got my father thinking, okay, maybe there's a bigger market for them. So, but in those days you couldn't buy computer games, so you had to just write your own and then play
you had
them.
to write your own, yeah.
Yeah. So that was quite good. And then by the time the ZX81 and ZX Spectrum came along, I was more into the bicycles, and there were so many good games on the Spectrum that I just sort of, I didn't do any programming on the Spectrum. I just used to play the games. And back in those days, I think parents in general were a bit disappointed that the children would get a computer for a birthday or Christmas or something, and all they would do is play computer games on them. But of course, they didn't realise that the industry was going to grow into a massive industry in its own right. But in the day, it was sort of thought of as a bit disappointing that all you did was play games.
So Sir Clive didn't forbid you, but he didn't like that you play.
He didn't mind so much, actually. He was okay. He was a bit disappointed that we sort of didn't do anything more worthy, but he didn't mind too much.
Did you experience increased attention from your friends, etc., as to the son of a person who made the computer revolution, and what did your mates think about Spectrums and other computers by your father?
It was odd at the time, because at school it was sort of well known that I guess who my dad was, and at that time, early 80s, he was pretty much a household name. Everyone in the country would know sort of him. But it was fun at school, actually. Everyone at school had a ZX81 or a ZX Spectrum. It's quite fun, actually. It sort of felt kind of quite special at the time, I guess.
Yeah. And you, by the way, you told that you program on the other machines, but did you program on the Spectrum in BASIC or assembler?
I did a little bit of program, never in assembler, but I did program a little bit in BASIC. But the most programming I did was on the Tandy TRS-80, and that was all in BASIC.
Yeah, I got it. The Spectrum scene is very active nowadays. There are lots of competitions, new games, music, and so on. What do you think about this, and what is your attitude to all this Spectrum movement?
Yeah, it's sort of it's kind of almost all sort of new to me, believe it or not, because it's sort of, I think that's probably more an Eastern European thing than than back in the UK. and so it's only really since he sort of passed away and sort of the guys in Poland reached out to me and yourself, and I started hearing that, you know, last year I think there was 200 plus new Spectrum games out, and I didn't realise that movement was there. It's you know, it's fun. It's a lovely thing.
Thanks. Tell us how Sir Clive felt about the failure of his C5. Was that an unexpected strike for him, or it was an expected result?
I think it was unexpected at the time. I mean, he was gearing up to sell, I think, like 100,000 of them a year. I mean, he thought it was going to be a big product, and absolutely, you know, it bombed. And it really sold badly, and then it also started getting a sort of a bad press, and you know, it was the butt of sort of some jokes on television and stuff like that. So it just went downhill rapidly from there. And no, he wasn't sure it was going to be a full-on success, but it was definitely a much bigger failure than he had anticipated. But I mean, he sort of takes it on the chin. I think if you invent things, you know, some of the inventions take off and become really successful, like the Spectrum, you know, if you're lucky, and other inventions just don't. And you know, I think a little bit, you sort of never know which ones are going to be the big ones and which ones are going to be the big failures. It's just, you just do the inventions, and if I can speak for him, and do the inventions and hope they're all successful, but accept that every so often one comes on that doesn't do well.
Yeah, I came up with a question. It's not in my list, but I had to ask it. Who he was more, a businessman or an inventor?
I would definitely say an inventor. Yeah, definitely. I think the sort of business side was something you sort of have to do, because otherwise you're not going to make any money, and if you don't make any money, you haven't got a business and you can't do another invention. But he spent all his time thinking about inventions, and the business side was sort of very much secondary, as opposed to, I think, from what you hear, say a character like Alan Sugar, who's, you know, very much into business, and what it is his business makes, he doesn't really care. He just likes business and likes running business. My father was probably the other way around. So,
another question that wasn't in my list: what was the attitude of Sir Clive to Alan Sugar?
Yeah, I think he sort of. I think I mean, he was very handy that Alan Sugar came along and bought the Spectrum, because, you know, Clive needed some cash after the C5. But I think a little bit, you know, my father sort of maybe saw him as a bit of a wheeler dealer, you know, just into business. Fair enough. But, you know, my father's much more into engineering and inventing.
Yeah. Thank you.
And yeah, I think my father, if you asked him what he did for a living, he'd say inventor, not businessman.
Thank you. Tell us, please, how Sir Clive lived in the 2000s and 2010s. Was he somehow interested in what was happening in the digital world? As I know, he didn't use a computer, but in general, did he have any idea of what was going on in the world of computers?
Probably, he sort of kept a little bit in touch with it, but probably more into engineering, into more materials. You know, if a new type of 3D printer came out, you might know about it, or if there's new types of alloys that had a particular characteristics that were new to the market. That sort of engineering, I would say, is more keen on, whereas the digital stuff, he'd know a little bit about it, but probably it's more the material science and that sort of thing he was more into.
What did you think of your father's activities when you were a child? Were you interested in what he did?
Yeah, very much, and certainly sort of growing up in the 70s, he had a big. The factory was just outside Cambridge, a village called St Ives, sort of old 19th century building. And I used to love going there as a kid. And he was on the sort of top floor. I mean, each floor of the building must have been roughly, at a guess, maybe 1,000 square meters, and there were 4 or 5 floors. And then there was engineers in an accounting departments, and downstairs on the ground floor there were all the calculators getting made, which, you know, that's where the production lines were of people soldering calculators together and putting them together. And like a birthday present, I used to get kind of a normal birthday present, like a bicycle or something like that. And then at Christmas, I used to get whatever the latest Sinclair invention was. So I got the black watch, digital watch, when that came out for a Christmas. I used to get a pocket television for a Christmas present the next year. I think I got the ZX80 for a Christmas present. So yeah, that was always fun to go and see, and to visit the factory and the engineers and everything. That was quite exciting to go there. Good.
I'm jealous about it.
Yeah, so it's quite unusual already.
Was your father upset by the fact that his computers were used mainly for gaming?
I think it was a little bit. I mean, that was a very sort of widespread belief, especially among parents. You know, back in the 1980s when they were coming out, the parents would often, you know, save up to give their children a computer for their big birthday present or a big Christmas present. And I think it was pretty widely, a lot of parents felt a bit disappointed that their children all they were doing was playing computer games on them. And I think I would say yes, my father was in that category too. But as I say, not realising that actually that was the birth of what was going to be a very big brand new industry.
Yeah.
So not so bad in the end.
Yeah, you got it. How did your father feel about game consoles? Maybe he told something about releasing his own game console.
As far as I know, he never did. He was sort of liked the computers and liked the idea of giving people, you know, putting computers into people's homes and being one of the very first to do that. But games consoles, I think probably no, they're just for playing games on. Not really particularly interested. And I never saw him ever develop one or look into making one. Not his cup of tea.
I read that a few weeks before his death, he was still inventing something. My condolences for the death of your father. Of course.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he was. Yes, he was sort of starting to get much more into sort of bicycles and transports in the later years, and he was still working on something, but actually that reminds me, I'm not quite sure because I didn't see him. Probably the last time I saw him was probably a month or two before he passed away. And actually at the funeral, I was chatting to a guy called Ben Wilson who used to work as a freelancer for my father and he was mentioning that he saw Clive just a week or two before he passed away, and that Clive was still working on another bicycle design. But I didn't get a chance at the funeral to ask Ben about it. So actually that reminds me, next time I see Ben, or when I see Ben, I'll have to ask him what the last thing was that Clive was working on. I don't know. It was some bicycle, but I don't know what.
Bicycle. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
that wasn't a question from my list, but I remember that.
But he was right up until the end, still coming up with new designs.
Was Sir Clive proud and happy about the incredible popularity of the Spectrum, or he was only interested in the Spectrum in terms of profit?
No, much more about it being successful, and the profit was kind of almost neither here nor there to him. The sort of profit from the spectrum or from one product would just mean you got more money to put into the next invention. He wasn't really a big spender. He had a nice flat in London, but it's quite modest size-wise. He wasn't really into buying, stuff. No, the Spectrum success was very much about being pleased about having a successful invention, and the money was just there to pay for the next invention.
But he wasn't interested in Spectrum itself. Yeah, it was just a tool for him for getting money for his next inventions, as I understand.
Well, I think he was very happy that it was so successful. That's definitely a big plus. But but he was sort of more into the hardware. So as an engineer, he was definitely a hardware engineer, absolutely not a software engineer. So he never learned to program at all. But he knew when the computer was switched off and you opened it up, he knew exactly what was inside and what all the chips did, and the design of it was his design, hardware wise. But software and what went on when you switched it on is almost not interested.
Do you know if Sir Clive personally took any part in development of the Spectrum and other his successful products, computers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was a hardware electronics engineer, self-taught. He never learned it at university. He just read it out of books. But the sort of genius, if I can use the word, of the engineering inside the Spectrum and all of the Sinclair products, that was his inventions. I mean, that's his work personally. I mean, he had some other engineers working for him, and some of them were very clever. But the genius part of the design, that was his input. I mean, that's what he did. It's not one of those companies where he gets other people to do that work. That was his job personally.
There are lots of argues here. Some people say that he didn't do anything himself for the Spectrum, so he did.
As far as I'm aware, yes. I mean, absolutely for the earlier products, the little radios back in the 1960s, the circuit board for that radio was his design of circuit board. The same with the calculator, same with the digital watch. He was designing circuit boards personally. Because I wasn't there in the office. I was at home, with my mother and my brother and sister, not in the office. But no, my understanding was that he was also part of the hardware engineering. I think that was his job. That was his work as well.
So you think he did some engineering work for the ZX Spectrum?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes, I mean, when he looked at the computers, the competing computers that were around before the Spectrum and before the ZX80, if you open them up, they had the same computing power as the ZX80 or the ZX Spectrum, but if you physically opened them, you'd see they had double the number of chips in, double the number of components, or more. And whereas when you open a ZX80 or you open a ZX Spectrum, there's just one board with only half a dozen chips on it. That's why the computer was cheap. It did a really good job, but the manufacturing costs were very low. And that sort of how to get the chip count down and those sort of areas, that was what my father did for a living. That was his job.
Yeah. There is a legend here that the first ZX Spectrum with that rubber keyboard, that rubber keyboard was developed by Sir Clive personally. Do you know something about it?
That was definitely. My understanding was yes, he did work on that part of that design, because the problem, one of the areas with computers that made them expensive before that was that if they used proper keys like they would on an IBM computer or something, each key has several components. So it's a little bit of plastic, there's a little spring underneath, there's a little switch underneath that, and in those days things weren't made by robots. So to make those keyboards, you'd have somebody on a production line picking up one piece of plastic, putting a little spring in it, physically connecting that to the board. You know, there's a lot of manual work still in those days. So one of the areas where Clive looked at and said, okay, if you get the cost of the keyboard down, you can get the cost of the computer down. So that was, and then you have to invent a new way to do the keyboard. So yeah, that's exactly the sort of area, that's exactly the sort of technical problem that he would look at, realise that's one of the problems that the competitors hadn't managed to solve. So that's, if you solve those problems, that's when you get a cheaper computer. So that was his job. That's what he does.
Yeah.
It's sort of almost easy to invent things, but once you invent something, you get stuck on technical problems, and he was the one that resolved technical problems himself, as well as some of the other engineers. But I mean, he was a lead engineer in that area.
Yeah, thanks. Do you remember what kind of electronics Sir Clive used in the 80s, and what electronics were in your house back in the days?
Back in the 80s, I mean, he was at home. Well, he was still using a slide rule. He was very good at mathematics, and he just preferred using a slide rule than a pocket calculator. So even though he invented the pocket calculator, he personally used to use a slide rule. And at home, he had a good hi-fi system, so that was in the house back in the 80s, and we had a projection colour TV, which was, with probably like a 50-inch screen, which would have been a big telly, which would have been quite unusual. I think probably about one of the biggest TVs you could buy back in the 80s. But other than that, that was about it, really. Nothing, everything else was just what you would find in any other home. I don't know, fridge, freezer, microwave, nothing else clever electronics anywhere, really.
Back in the time, did you use any devices or computers that your father produced, and did you give him any feedback regarding his products?
I did a bit, yeah. Growing up, I always used to use a Sinclair calculator when I was at school.
Which model? Do you remember which exactly model?
I can't remember the name of them. I was too young to have the very first one, which was the black one, the executive. I never had an executive. But at school in the 70s, I always had, I can't remember the name of them, but whatever the latest calculator was, I'd always pretty much have that. And I found out, actually, if I left my school bag out overnight and it was frosty, it would kill the calculator. They couldn't stand getting frozen. So I had to remember to bring the school bag indoors and not sort of leave it by the front door. And then I had a black watch, which was the first digital watch.
Yeah, I know.
I think it was the first boy in school to have a digital watch. So that was good fun. And so I've lost my track a little bit there. What was the question again?
Did you give Did you give him any feedback?
Feedback.
Yeah, feedback.
Yeah, I did. So I did, but it didn't always seem to be appreciated. I had a QL when I was at university, and that was one of the early ones, and the micro drives was a nightmare. I ended up having to physically pull the micro drive, out of the machine to try and stop it on several occasions, and lost quite a bit of my university work. So I gave him feedback about that, and he just said, well, it was one of the early ones, he didn't seem to appreciate it. And on the A-bike, which was his fold-up bicycle that he did, that was a good design, but probably the wheels were too small.
Too small wheels. I don't know how
Yeah, and the big problem with that is the rolling resistance goes up. That the smaller the wheel, the harder it is to pedal. And the wheels on that were so small that it as a friend put it, it was the first bicycle where it was actually easier to walk than it was to pedal, which is, so I remember saying to him when it came out, I think there's too much friction somewhere in the design. I couldn't identify that it was the wheel size, but I said there's too much friction. But again, he didn't always appreciate criticism. As far as he's concerned, everything was great. So.
Yeah, and another question that wasn't in my list, but have you got any idea why did he release his C5 in January? Why did he do that presentation when it was frosty and cold?
It was just I do it. It was just bad luck. It was supposed to come out in the middle of the summer or even in springtime before, and it just got the whole factory. It takes time to set the factory up, and everything just got delayed. And so it was ready to go in January, and you can't wait until springtime because the factory's already there, the production line's already there, all the employees are there waiting to start, manufacturing them. It's just I think at the time he knew it wasn't a good time to launch, but you have to launch. It's ready to go. You just got to go for it.
But wasn't he eager to release his C5 as sooner as he could? Because it was the project of his life, I think.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it's particularly the project of his life.
He didn't consider it as a project of his life.
No. I think it was just the next invention. And like the calculators have been one invention. Then the digital watch. Then the pocket TVs. Then the ZX80. Then the ZX81, the Spectrum. Then the C5. It's just the latest. Yeah, he didn't see it as like his big invention. It was just the next invention. And as I say, just got launched in January just because the production got delayed and they were ready to go in January and they had to go there. They can't wait, any longer.
Yeah, I got it. Well, and the last question will be about knighthood. How important was the knighthood to Sir Clive, and were you and other family members present at the knighthood ceremony? Tell us, please, how it was.
Yeah, no, he was definitely very chuffed to get the knighthood. That was a big thing for him, absolutely. And yeah, I remember the day we went to Buckingham Palace. And that was me, my father, my mother, and my brother. So obviously you'll get dressed up. And in those days, nowadays, if you come to London, you can pay £20 and you can sort of visit Buckingham Palace. You can go in as a tourist. But in those days, you couldn't go unless you happened to be a member of the royal family or were invited by the royals. So to be able to actually go into Buckingham Palace itself was a huge deal. No, my father was very proud to get that. And I remember we went to a really expensive restaurant that evening. And my father was never particularly into, we always went to most modest places all the time. But that night, I think we went to what I'm sure was one of the best in London and had a big meal. I remember the meal and remember going. He was very proud to do it.
Yeah. I don't know how to ask it correctly, but the knighthood ceremony, who was there? The Queen? It's the Queen herself?
Yeah, the Queen. That's right. Yeah, that's it. The Queen's there. So Clive goes up. He has to kneel down in front of the Queen, and the Queen still does it with the sword. Taps him on the shoulders with the sword. Sort of says hello, says a few words, and then it's the next person's turn. But yeah, it's all done properly and still in the same tradition.
Dear Crispin, thank you very much for your answers. I'm sure that for the Russian-speaking Spectrum scene, the things you told will be incredibly interesting. May wish you best wishes and success.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's my pleasure to do the interview.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
All the best. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.